A todos, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Un agradecimiento muy especial a Shadi por haber aceptado esta invitación y a cerrar el ciclo del Global Accessibility Leaders que comenzó este año gracias a la ayuda de Susana Pallero, que se ha puesto al hombro toda esta convocatoria y es nuestra entrevistadora. Realmente es para el máster muy importante y estamos muy agradecidos de poder hacer estas conferencias, estas charlas, estos acercamientos a diferentes referentes, a diferentes personas con gran experiencia en accesibilidad y nos gusta precisamente abrirlo a todo mundo para poder de alguna manera ampliar estos conocimientos entre todos y generar una red cada vez mayor. Así que como he dicho la primera vez cuando estuvo Rain, no me voy a alargar en esta presentación porque aquí el protagonista hoy es Shadi y Susana, que van a charlar con nosotros y seguramente vamos a aprender mucho. Muchas gracias a los dos y los dejo. Te dejo, Susi.
Ok, bueno, bienvenidos a todos como siempre y ahora voy a cambiar a inglés en este canal. Yo voy a estar hablando en inglés con Shadi y pueden escuchar en español en el otro. Así que como hago siempre antes de empezar, digo esta frase de detrás de un acento marcado hay mucha valentía, así que tengan en consideración con mi inglés, que puede no ser el mejor, pero bueno, estamos intentando comunicarnos y eso es lo importante. Encima hoy somos dos que no somos nativos, porque Yadi tampoco es nativo, él es egipcio. Así que bueno, arrancamos, ahora yo voy a cambiar a inglés. All right, so now I'm switching to English. Well, thank you again, Shadi, for being here. I know that your agenda is pretty, busy all the time. So thanks for making this time to share these moments with you and for sharing all the knowledge that you have. I know that probably everyone in accessibility knows who you are, but for those that maybe have not been working in accessibility, let me introduce you because I know that you're too humble to do it yourself. So I will I will be the one presenting you. So Shadi is Principal Accessibility Standards and Policy Manager at Amazon, but he has over 30 years of experience in accessibility for people with disabilities, with particular focus on international technical standards and policies on digital accessibility. And prior to joining Amazon, Shadi worked for the Web Accessibility Initiative, that is part of the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, that I didn't know, that is of the United Nations, and Xerox, Austria, among others. He holds master degrees in computer science and in business and administration, and has lived experience of the impact of technology and innovation on inclusion. And a lot of things more. Actually, this is a short introduction of what actually Shadi does. Okay, so remember everyone that you can ask anything you want. You're free to ask any questions. You can unmute or you can write in the chat directly. It's up to you. And feel free to ask any question because Shadi is like one of the people that have been in digital accessibility since the big bang of digital accessibility. So you can practically ask anything that you want. Probably Shadi have been there. Okay, so I would like to structure this conversation around your unique perspective because you have more than 30 years in accessibility and your work at W3C, your current role at Amazon on accessibility standards and policy, your experience in international organizations. You have this 360 view. And I wanted to know first, what are the biggest shifts that you have seen in how digital accessibility is understood and practiced?
So first of all, thank you so much for your kind words, both Andrea and Susie. Susie, it's a clear pleasure to be with you. We've been, I might say, friends for a long time now, and it's really great to be here. Shifts. Well, this very course is a shift. When I started with accessibility, and by the way, I got into accessibility by complete coincidence. I was studying computer science at the Technical University of Vienna, having been for the second year in a wheelchair, not even knowing anything about my own disability, and trying to make my university a little bit more accessible, finding out how inaccessible the world is. And I hear about a pilot study at the University of Linz. Some of you might know Klaus Miesenberger, so he's my big mentor, with computer science for the blind. And I said, wait a sec, you want to tell me blind people, they're not only using computers, they are actually doing computer science? I want to see that. So one thing led to the other. But at the time, it was individual champions. There were only a handful of instructors, university professors, individual champions. You could really count them on one or two hands at most, who were working on this. It was completely optional. It's kind of unimaginable that you could complete an entire computer science study and not even hear about the word accessibility. So it's great to see that there is demand and that there are courses like this for accessibility. I think that's one of the shifts. But on a bigger scale, again, personally, when I started computer science, or getting into accessibility as a computer science student, for me, it was a very idealistic thing. It was something aspirational. Quite honestly, hands down, I myself didn't take it as serious. I didn't think of a world where big companies would be really trying to earn the business of customers with disabilities. You see that now. You see one company launches a feature, the other one launches another, and I think that's the best thing that can happen to accessibility, is that it's shifting. It's not completely shifted. There's still a lot of why. Why do we need to do this? Unfortunately, uh, many years later, we're still discussing the why, but it's shifting from the why to the how. How do I do this? Not why do I need to do this? It's becoming more and more common practice. It's becoming common expectation. Just like it's expectation nowadays, when you build a house, you build an elevator. Nobody asks why anymore, hopefully, or things like that. It's becoming more and more that accessibility is something you need to account for. The question is really how, with all this digital technologies evolving and changing so rapidly. Can't have a session without saying the buzzword AI. But not only that, I mean, we're seeing all sorts of different kinds of digital technologies and devices. The web itself has become so all around us, so ubiquitous, and all sorts of different devices, interfaces. Last time, my elevator has a screen, and I could see an HTML error in there, and it was just like, sorry, an HTTP error. So it's like a small HTTP server or a small browser fetching some pages and rendering it in an elevator. Never thought, the web was so nice and clean in your browser. That was only what the web is. Today, if you try to define the web, it's nearly impossible, because it's just a digital interface that is part of everything. So that is, in a nutshell, maybe, I think the most significant shift. And sorry, I'll add on one more thing. I mentioned before that I started off as a technical student, and I'm an engineer by training. So I love to solve technical issues. I love to take a screwdriver or, and try to fix things. But over the years, I've learned that what we're doing in accessibility it's not really about the technical solutions. As much as I love the technical standards and the technical solutions and all the, it's not about that. It's really about a mindset change. That is in effect what we're doing. We're shifting the mindset. We're shifting our society from a segregated one to a more inclusive society. At least I hope that's how I like to see it. And I think that is also one of the things, the shift in perception. How are people with disabilities seen in society? Are they seen as equal or not? I think that's really the base question. If that mindset is there, then the solutions follow. People find solutions, but the mindset needs to be there. So that's maybe a shift that I think there's more acceptance, there's more realization from all around, from people with disabilities themselves. They demand, rightfully, they demand accessibility. They expect accessibility, which maybe wasn't the case 30 years ago. From regulators and policymakers, there's an expectation for accessibility more and more. And from businesses, they know that they're expected to deliver. They know that, whether internally for their employees or externally for their customers, they know that this is something that is more and more expected. So that's a big shift in terms of moving from the why do we need digital accessibility to how do we actually do it in practice, day to day.
Great. Yeah, to build on that, because I was thinking as you were speaking that you say you have like consciousness in some way, and then solutions will follow. And I always think from this perspective, from the Latin American perspective, and the changes, those shifts are different in different parts of the world. But at the same time, this last thing that you mentioned, that it is about how society perceives people with disabilities, that has changed a lot. And I feel like that happened also in a Latin American level. Like there's this perspective, but what is still different is how we act on that. There's less practice, there's less presence from the state in some parts. And I was now wondering, because we already discussed this, what has improved significantly, but what still feels surprisingly unresolved?
Yeah, you touched on it. So first of all, I can completely relate to what you're saying. I come originally from Egypt, and have very close ties. My mom still lives there, and family members and so on. I live and work in Europe, but for a US company. I've been working with, so there's very different cultural aspects here also in terms of accessibility culture. The most significant, I think, piece of legislation that impacted, I think, the entire world is the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, because it's so old, because it's been around for such a long time. And I think it's a milestone achievement that many, the European Accessibility Act was trying to also look at that as a model, but also address things that the ADA did not address at the time, like digital technology, because it didn't exist at the time. So what I'm trying to say is, I think different parts of the world are at different stages or different places. Alone in Europe, let's just stay within Europe. I think there's many big differences. And I don't want to get too philosophical, but in Austria, for example, unfortunately, there is still a lot of public funds going into institutionalized schooling rather than integrative models of schools where students, kids with and without disabilities, grow up together. And I think the reason why I'm bringing that up, even if it's a side topic, is because I do think, going back to the societal change that does impact, when we already segregate children at such a young age, it's no surprise when then somebody with a disability is applying for a job, or that there's all these, we don't know how to deal with it. We are scared. How do I speak with you? How do I treat you? What is it okay to say or not? Not just you're a person,
Yeah.
and this normality. So what I'm trying to say is, even in Europe, we're still at very different places where we are with regard to this shift, to this change. And I think that's the one thing that still surprises me, because we are in the accessibility field, and many of us has been working for such a long time, or maybe also surrounded by the topic. And, I still get questions. And this is not in any way, to be seen as a critique or something, but it still surprises me when I hear about people who have never seen somebody, people working in digital accessibility, and I've never seen somebody using a screen reader, for example. And it's not their fault. Again, it comes back to the fact that we're so segregated, such a segregated society, that you never get exposed to somebody using a wheelchair, somebody using a screen reader, somebody using a hearing aid, or these kind of things. We don't have as much mixing. And I think that's a root cause of a lot of the issues. And I think that's some of the things that still surprised me. It still surprises me also some of the unconscious bias that we have very often, how we will treat. So this is a real example. At the time when I was working at W3C, this is many years ago, so hopefully it changed a bit. And we're trying to promote the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG. I think most of you have heard of it, given the course.
We're all familiar with it.
That's good, right? So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, trying to promote that. The response you get, it's like, oh, this is really hard. It takes a lot of effort, the testing, the cost, etc., etc. Now, these same guidelines have been repackaged as the so-called mobile web best practices. At the time, the telephones didn't have a lot of computing powers. We're talking about early 2000s now, 2010, maybe 2008, something like that. So the phones are not very powerful. Broadband is still very expensive. And so the mobile web best practices were basically maybe 90% WCAG. It's still, provide text alternatives for images, because you don't want to download the images. You just want to show the alternatives. Provide good contrast, because you're using the mobile phone in the sun glare and you can't see the text very well. This was immediately taken on. It's like, oh, that's cool. I can get my web to work on. And this is the kind of unconscious bias. Very often accessibility is held to a different standard almost, has to justify, like, why is this really needed? How many people really benefit from that? WCAG is too long. It's too hard to read. But then the new version of ECMAScript, standard comes out, the specification, and developers will read it overnight. No questions asked, right? And they won't say it's too hard or it's too difficult or something. Anyway, I'm not saying everything is perfect with the technical standards. We're far from that, and it can be made simpler, it can be made easier, etc. All this, but I do feel that there's sometimes kind of a bit of a pushback, and accessibility having to justify itself even after so many years. Still discussing the why. I wish we can move more away from the why and talk more about the how. I find that as an engineer, I find that much more exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, you've touched some points that now I have so many questions. But something that is interesting is this point about culture and how people, what are the motivations that people find to actually implement those changes. And as you said, WCAG was there, all the importance around accessibility was there. We were all trying to get companies to adopt WCAG and all of that, and suddenly this mobile guide was cool. So everybody was like, oh yeah, and it was WCAG, but in other words. And that made me think about this shift that I perceived in the last years. I haven't been around for as much as you have, but I remember that, I don't know, 15 years ago, we were not the cool kids. You know, the accessibility people, we were like really segregated in some way, like, well, you're not cool. Nobody wants to hear about it once again. But suddenly there were these spotlight put on the user, and that was done by the designers, you know, that where it shifted more from this development perspective more to a user-centered design, and the user is important and so on. And I think that that helped us a lot, you know, to install accessibility. And now we're not the cool kids, but we're cooler than we used to be. And I think that that shows how important it is to be connected to the culture, to the motivation, to the social changes in some way, in order to advance this. That is sometimes something that we advocate for. And another thing that I was thinking is in your bio, when you send it, it mentions, and when I was reading it, and it said lived experience of the impact of technology and innovation and inclusion. And this is a wording that I don't usually see in bios, that it's a lived experience. And I love that, because right now in the master, the students has just finished, and a lot of them acquired all this theory, and now they are going for that lived experience now. And I was wondering, how has that shaped the way you think about accessibility standards, policy, and emergent technologies? Like your lived experience, how shaped that theory, let's say?
Okay, you covered so many things. I'm trying to think what is the best way. Great questions. So first of all, let me touch upon the topic about the first one on being the cool kid or the and I work on standards and policies, so I'm often seen as the compliance guy, which is, when I walk into the room, when I come into the room, they're like, oh shit, like, what does he want again? And, he's going to be asking for this, he's going to be asking for that, or he's going to be, and I think it's the blessing and curse of regulation, really. Unfortunately, without any regulation, I would love to be convinced otherwise. I know I have to be very careful now saying that as a business, saying that as Amazon, but honestly, I've yet to see anything happen without on accessibility. We talk about the curb cut. The curb cut is the sidewalk that gets lowered, which is essential for a wheelchair user to get onto the road, but everybody else uses it: bicycles, skateboards, luggage, strollers. Everybody uses it. And so this is the example we always take about how and when you do it consistently across every street and so on, the economies of scale kick in. So the cost of doing it becomes negligible in relation to the benefits, etc. So this is the classical example that we use in terms of scaling accessibility, and how, when it becomes something that is done, benefits everyone and has marginal cost. I have yet to see a country, and if anybody can prove me wrong, I'd love to see that. I've not seen any country implement curb cuts without that being regulated, without that being, a law. It's unfortunate. It's the world that we live in. So regulation is kind of important to push the topic forward. At the same time, regulation also has this effect about kind of being the negative. It's not really exciting. It's not, yeah, it's not engaging. It's not cool to be threatened by a lawsuit. That is usually not the nice motivator. That's not what gets me excited as an engineer. Do this or I will sue you. That doesn't get me happy. So it's that balance. So what I think we generally in accessibility need to do is demonstrate over and over, and it's a bit unfair because we have to justify over and over again, but we have to prove how actually accessibility benefits the population, benefits everyone. And I think that's the way out. And I think that goes into your second question about moving away from this perception of, we are coming down, to sue you, or, this kind of like negative framing into, if you follow accessibility, let me help you make your website or your digital product better for everyone. And let me prove that to you. And there are many examples. I think, I can't share specific numbers, but look at captioning on any on any thing. The amount of people using captioning is usually way more than we think there are people with hearing disabilities. The amount we're using captioning right now, because I don't speak Spanish, right? The amount of people who use simple features like, increasing text. Many browsers now remove text resize from the accessibility menu. They put it in the quote unquote normal menu or the mainstream menu because it's a feature that everybody wants. And these kind of examples, these things, this is the way that I try to work, is proving bit by bit how accessibility overall has a benefit. And I think that's the shift. Now, coming in with a lived experience, again, that's a twofold thing. On the one thing is, it's frustrating, it's difficult to see because, just wait another 30 years and think will be even better. It's kind of a bit tough, to tell somebody, just wait 30 years, it's getting better, don't worry. But it is what it takes. Being in accessibility takes a very long breath. It's a marathon. It's an ultra marathon, maybe. It's a very, very long thing. Things happen very slowly. You think it's not happening, but if you look back, you actually do see changes and you do see importance. But I think the important thing about lived experience, and I'm not saying only people with disabilities should be working on accessibility. In fact, it cannot scale. We need everyone. But I compare it maybe a bit to the gender movement. I think only women should be talking. Well, only women can ask for their own rights and for their own. But that doesn't mean that men and other genders, shouldn't be supportive of that and can't be allies and can't be working in that field. So it's not an exclusive thing, but kind of under the banner of nothing without us, about us. And I think that's one of the issues. We need to have more people with disabilities in the driver's seats, in leadership positions, taking these decisions, moving things forward. But that's not in any way meaning exclusion. First of all, because you can't really find and you shouldn't try to find the line what's disabled and what's not. But also because we need all hands that we can get on board, and all hands on deck, really. And it's a societal thing. So it's not just, again, just compared to the gender movement. Again, who's leading, who's in the driver's seats. You can't have men deciding what's best for women. You can't have people with disabilities deciding what's best for people with disabilities alone. But that doesn't mean that we don't need, a diverse group moving that forward. So that is maybe why I put that line, to kind of underline that lived experience. I think that does give a bit of a different perspective on things. It's a very different, I don't know, for me, it's a big driver and passion and motivation. And one of the things why I'm still here, despite all the, having it be such a tough uphill battle, but over the years, I think it's something that is really worth it and really, um, you know, contributing to a change.
And also from your experience, how do you think that people without disabilities that are working in this field can support so we can have more people with disabilities working in this field?
Everyone, and it's the same for, I mean, it's also, I mean, being disabled alone does, I know this is going to be very sensitive now because people with disabilities are often portrayed as the experts. Yes, they're the experts for themselves, the experts for their own lives, but they're not necessarily experts for accessibility generally. I had to learn a lot about blind people, about deaf people, about deaf-blind, about people with different cognitive and learning disabilities. But, you know, over the years, and still, I would not call myself as an expert for those people. I think only, you know, each one can only represent themselves. So I'm not trying to find too much kind of categorization between people with and without disabilities. I think everybody can support everybody. There's no question there. Definitely, each person can, like, only the person in question can speak about their own life and their own lived experience. You know, I cannot speak for you, Susana, and you cannot speak for me, and so on. But just alone having a disability does not make me an expert, you know, blanket expert. It makes me just an expert for my own life, for my own disability, for my own experience, for what, you know, for how I am seeing the world. But it's not a blanket. So I think being an expert is not qualification based on disability. It's a qualification based on how much you really engage with the subject matter.
Absolutely. Yeah, but I was more wondering, like, I don't know, I have a foundation, and in there, through the years, we try to support, of course, people joining. I say it more like a Latin American perspective, where you are systematically getting, you know, a no for an answer when you are a person with disabilities in joining a lot of activities. And it happens to women and computer science also, you know, like it is from a cultural standpoint, something that women are not, you know, related to in some way. So one of the things that we do is try to provide, I don't know, free trainings and things like that, but so they can actually get involved and say, well, computer science can be something for me too. So I was wondering, like, those kind of things, if you, in your experience, have seen these kind of programs or things like that that could help us be more inviting with people with disabilities, because of course, not all people with disabilities want to work in accessibility. That is another bias. You know, I know a lot of people with disabilities that don't work in accessibility, in digital accessibility, even though they work in technology, and they are not interested in working in digital accessibility either. So, but yeah, I absolutely, I think that there's these two phases of accessibility. One is the experiential one, you know, that you say, well, what I can contribute from my background, my cultural background, my, I don't know, me as a person, I don't know, from Latin America as a woman and all of that. And there's another one that is the technical side of it, that is purely technical, something that you have to study, to be in love with, to keep studying all the time. And in that point, I think it is super important to say that having a disability gives you a unique perspective that is your perspective, as you said, but it doesn't make you an expert, because an expert is someone that's studying, like, constantly on that. I will be reading some questions that we have here. Oh, here is Mireya says, just a comment to break the ice. Thanks to Shadi, I feel like a new, cooler marathon runner, but I have to recognize that maybe sometime in the next 30 years, I'll switch to walking. All right.
I guess just keep moving.
Yeah, keep moving forward. Absolutely. So now I'm shifting to something that I think it's super interesting for all of us because we all work with standards. So I'm moving to guidelines. And of
Just to
course,
say, to
yeah,
interrupt,
yeah.
Alessandra, I want to ask, what do you think is the main barrier to someone without disabilities to learn accessibility? Again, I don't think it's really specific to with or without disabilities. Uh, you know, again, it took me many years in hard, close work with different peers with disabilities to learn about their own disabilities and about their own. So I think I'm trying to put this as a way that doesn't become too what do you call it? To, to, to be too daunting is the right word. Seeming to be too difficult, because I don't want the learning curve in accessibility to be too steep. Like you need to learn all this before you can do anything. That shouldn't be the case. I think you can get started right away, but the more you understand about different disabilities, you need to have some base level to be able to work effectively um, to be able to even involve people with disabilities, to be asking the right questions. So don't be deterred. Don't see this as a wall. See this maybe as a small climb in the marathon that you're running. There's a bit of an uphill part. The marathon starts with a bit of an uphill part. Let's put it that way. With or without disabilities, which is about cross disability learning. It's about learning about how does a screen reader work? How does somebody who, all these misconceptions that, I remember when I was starting, people would be asking, well, given at the time there wasn't that much YouTube or that much like online videos, but, somebody who's deaf, why don't they just read the page and understanding the issues? It gets even more complex with people with learning disabilities. I think, people with sensory disabilities, not being able to move, not being able to see, not being able to hear, you can at least imagine it a little bit. So the empathy is maybe a bit easier. But with somebody who's thinking differently, that gets very difficult to kind of like understand. And this is why we are a little bit behind in accessibility in that area, specifically just because we don't understand it as well. So that's one of the areas where I myself try to keep working on, try to keep improving my understanding, for questioning myself. What does it actually mean to have, I don't know, limited memory and try to use a website? What are the actual barriers and or whatever, these kind of things. So I don't know if I answered the question, Alessandri. Feel free to re-ask or get online if you want to engage a bit more, but I hope that helped.
Great. Yes, you did. Thank you. Say, perfect. There's the comment. I will read it out aloud. What you say is, well, it says, let me check who was it. Celso Soto. I know him. He's great. What you say is absolutely true. I live with a visual impairment and have been working with screen readers and training colleagues for 20 years, but that doesn't make me an expert in digital accessibility, nor did all of my students decide to pursue a career in digital accessibility. I believe it's important for people with disabilities to get more involved so that we don't just rely on allies, but also contribute to the development of solutions. Fortunately, within the visually impaired community, more and more of us are getting trained so we can contribute. Thank you for the comment. Now Carolina has a question. If accessibility were a philosophy or approach to work, do you think it would be better integrated into the development of accessible products and environments, both digital and analog?
I don't fully understand the question. if accessibility were a philosophy or approach to work.
Yeah, probably like more of a practice that comes from the internal conviction that's the best way of working or creating a product, probably. And I will let Carolina explain a little bit further. Okay. While Carolina...
Bueno,
Oh, there.
¿puedo hacerlo en español para que sea un poco más rápido?
Sí.
Ok, cuando me refería como a una filosofía, era, o sea, como un principio, como cuando aplicas los principios Agile, que se pueden aplicar a distintos entornos, pero tienes como las bases de esa filosofía y hace que de manera un poco más natural puedas integrar esto cuando estás pensando en desarrollar productos y servicios para todas las personas, más allá de si es accesibilidad para personas que tenemos discapacidad, sino verlo como accesibilidad para todas las personas, sea la persona que sea, con sus cosas que son similitudes y las cosas que también la hacen única como persona. De ahí viene la pregunta.
Gracias, Cara. So she was more trying to make a parallelism with for example, the Agile methodology that is more like this, because Agile is presented as a philosophy also. So it's like a way of thinking through the process that is embedded at that level in the teams. So it makes accessibility decisions more of things that would benefit everybody rather than for specific people.
Yes and no. So first of all, one of the things I started off in the built environment, again, as a wheelchair user, having only been the second year in a wheelchair, not even knowing my own disability well enough, and not even knowing other kinds of disability, physical disabilities, not even other, like I use a manual wheelchair. I didn't really understand or know what people in power wheelchairs, electric wheelchairs kind of need or do not need, or things like that. Anyway, I was trying to make the university a bit more accessible. And then I started learning about, well, it's not just about getting into the lecture room, but we need an induction loop for people who are hearing disabilities. What's an induction loop? What are here? So bit by bit, learning about other disabilities. But I come from a very analog kind of environment, and I see it's really the same. It doesn't matter if it's analog or digital. The techniques, the technologies is different, and the way that we address something is very different. The toolkit, so to say, but the approach and the philosophies may be really the same. It's the biases, people being scared at first, like, no, we don't want that, we don't need it, we'll figure it out later. Oh, we'll just, all the famous excuses. I was recently at a conference where they had a buzzword bingo for like the most famous excuses you get in the day job. Things like, we'll fix it later, we don't have the money right now, is this really a priority? These kind of questions. You have that whether it's digital or whether it's analog or whatever. So yes, I think it's an approach that should be fit into really the philosophy of the business, of the approach, that how it's trying to address things. And yes, it should have a broader things. It should have, but at the same time, we have to be careful not to lose sight. There are aspects that benefit everyone. There are aspects that are more specific to disability. So my wheelchair, for example, the tires come from, bicycle and bicycle racing, the wheels as well. But there are other technologies, maybe even the seating cushions, maybe from sports cars and these kind of things, so there's maybe a lot of synergies, but there's specific things like the brakes of the wheelchair or something is designed specifically. And so here, not necessarily everything will always be, so color contrast is something that maybe, has more benefit than cost, but there are other things like providing a braille, heading or something is more specific and has maybe more cost than general benefit. Overall, accessibility has more benefits than cost. But what I'm trying to get at is we need to be careful not to kind of, if it becomes for everybody, we can also lose specific disabilities out of sight. And this is indeed what happens with a lot of things that we think is too hard. We just move it to later. So it's a bit of a balance. Yes, we need to have it as a general approach. We need to have it as an inclusive thought, inclusive mindset that we're trying to make digital products better for everyone. But we also need to not lose sight from specific disabilities and specific requirements. So I always say that we need a user-centered design process. I always say, even though I love standards, and standards has been, the major part of my career. I think standards are really essential and critical, but don't start with standards. Start with the human. Start with the people, understanding the people, and use the standard as kind of like a tool, a resource input to help you address. We're not trying to please the standard. We're not trying to get the check marks all green. We're trying to please the humans, the customers, the users at the end. And we're trying to use that standard to achieve that goal. So the standards are a tool in that mindset. But at the same time, they will help us also not forget about edge cases that in day-to-day, especially when we think so broadly and think about a design for all, we forget maybe individual combinations of disabilities. And the standards maybe keep us honest here. Have you checked for this? Have you checked for that requirement? Because you might not be aware of everything every time. So I hope that addresses that question from Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have a very interesting question there from Afra, but I will make one more question before we move on to the AI questions. And talking about standards, I always remember something that you told me. I don't remember if it was over lunch or at the W3C meeting, but you said WCAG or any standards are the floor, not the ceiling. And I always try to transmit that to my students and my colleagues, that it is, the bare minimum, and over there we have a floor to start working, because that opens the door to people to actually engage with the products and then tell people if it is accessible or not, or you're actually building something that is going to be useful for the final user. But talking about standards, I have this question, and it's not about the information that you have, but what do you think? Are we closer to WCAG 3.0 or WCAG 2.3? What do you think?
I see some questions in the chat as well about WCAG 3. So if it's a marathon, don't wait for WCAG 3. We're still far away. One of the issues, it's easy, of course, to always be negative and say, oh, why didn't they do that, or why do they not do that? I think at least two tangents or two axes here. One is the web is becoming so much more complex that it's very difficult. Some people are asking about AI as well. How does AI relate into this? It's very easy to kind of fall into this trap of AI will fix everything. We can just go home. Let's just turn off the Zoom. Let's all go home because AI will fix it all. That is kind of like this, and we've seen this in the past. This comes every few years. There's this silver bullet solution. I remember when OCR started to become better. It's like, okay, we don't need, because there's OCR, and the optical character recognition. So when things started to detect text in images or things like that, it's like, okay, or so we often jump very quickly. Of course, AI has a huge potential to create new things. but anyway, the technologies are moving very rapidly, very fast. The web, I mentioned that at the very beginning, the boundaries are very unclear. How would you define the web today? Before, again, it was what's in your browser is the web. Now the web is everything in an elevator. I mentioned that earlier, or whatever. So how would you even define the web? So there's that challenge. There's also the challenge of legacy. The more websites there are, and there are meanwhile trillions and trillions of websites, there are websites being created every day by AI, by the way, as well. So the amount of things being generated, so there's just so much legacy. So any change becomes exponentially more difficult. It was easier to move from WCAG 1. Well, it was easy to move to WCAG 1, first of all, from the TRACE guidelines that Greg van der Heijden had created back in the days. That was the guidelines that created first. And then these became the W3C version 1. There were only a few websites. It was easier to move to that. Moving to 2.0 was really difficult. Moving to 2.1, even though this was just adding a few requirements, was really difficult because now people had to change a lot of things. So that's also another thing. The more legacy there is, the more difficult it is to make change. So all these challenges the working group is trying to deal with. So that explains some of the delay. But I think the bottom line is don't wait for WCAG 3. Engage if you have the time, if you have the energy. Susie does. Others are welcome to read drafts, provide comments, but just take it with a grain of salt. This is still very early work, still early drafts. Nothing is written in stone. What you can rely on right now, the only thing that we have for good or bad is WCAG 2. Somebody else was asking, I'm cognizant of time, so I'm just going to start looking at some of the questions. Somebody was asking about the conformance model. I didn't read it in detail. This is still being debated very heavily in the working group. There are people who are very afraid. Anything that is not, the conformance model right now is you pass or you fail. You either meet WCAG or you don't. And we know real life is you'll always find a mistake somewhere. On a website with trillions of images or trillions of videos like YouTube or whatever, you'll always find something that doesn't work. So does it make sense to have standards that no real website can ever really meet in practice? That's one argument against. The other argument is as soon as you start opening that up, it's a very slippery slope. And do you want to call something that is accessible that is not? It is true that it's missing a text alternative. Might not have a big impact, but it is not accessible. You can't call something accessible that's not accessible. So this is the dilemma that the working group is trying to deal with, of how to model a new conformance model. I definitely fall in the camp, that's my personal opinion now, of having more pragmatic accessibility. I do think there's a difference between not having an elevator in the building and having a doormat in front of the building that is a nuisance, that makes it hard for me to get into the building. That does happen to me, especially these very deep doormats. That makes it very difficult for me to enter a building using a wheelchair as a quadriplegic. But it's very different than the building not having an elevator or not having an accessible bathroom. So not all issues are equal to me, but how do you put that in a standard in a way that doesn't open up for gaming and for people to already cut? That goes back to your earlier question, Susie, about the ceiling and not the floor. Sorry, I'm covering a couple of topics together. WCAG is really, or any technical standard is really a compromise, is really the bottommost of what the minimum that people can agree with, that can just live with, not even agree to. It's what they will not object to, what they can live with. So it's a compromise of a compromise, really. And so that's why it's the floor, it's the minimum. It doesn't, even now I said, it's accessible. WCAG doesn't tell you it's accessible. WCAG tells you you've done the minimum. You've done just the basics.
Yeah.
Is much more than WCAG. now in saying that.
If you follow WCAG and you address all the points, now you have a conformant product, not necessarily an accessible product.
You met the minimum, you met the compromise that I don't know how many hundreds of people, could agree to. And that's a great accomplishment. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're having that many people around the world. I mean, it's a global standard. It's something that so many different countries, so many different experts were able to agree to. That's a great accomplishment. But it's really the minimum. And the issue is that it then becomes like, okay, the checklist, what do I have to do? And did I, and it becomes kind of like the ceiling. It becomes WCAG is the, I need to work meeting all these requirements, and I forget the user behind that, and I forget that this is actually just a guide, a tool trying to help me understand what accessibility is.
Yeah.
It does relate back to the topic of WCAG 3 and even AI to a certain degree, in terms of, I wish we could get better models of, we used to call it technical accessibility and usable accessibility. So WCAG deals a lot with the technical accessibility, the interoperability with assistive technologies mostly. Provide a label so that the screen reader can read it, or make the page in such a way that the magnifier can increase the size. These kind of things operate with. What WCAG really misses is usability things. How many key presses is okay? It just tells you keyboard trap. But it can't really tell you, is 100 key presses okay, or 200 or 3 or 5? What's acceptable, what's too much? And that's very difficult to nail down in the technical standard and upfront say for every website, every type of website there possibly is, every type of web content, actually, it's more than a website, for every kind of application, X number of key presses.
Yeah. And it will depend also in your product and in your users, and a lot of, there's a lot of subjectivity. That happens with Koga also a lot. But yeah, absolutely. I think that WCAG and complying with the standards is more like a discussion opener for accessibility. It's like opening the door for accessibility in some way. And then accessibility is something that you work on and you never stop working on.
Just like usability.
Yeah.
We accept usability, that it's never done, and it's always there's constant improvement. It's a journey, and the expectations of customers change in usability just as much as in accessibility. The websites that were there 10 years ago or 20 years ago were very different than users would accept it. Now a user would never accept such clunky websites that were there 20 years ago. They want easy to find things. So the expectations of users also changes, and so you're never done with usability, and we accept that as a digital community. We should accept accessibility as well. It's not a one project and done. It's a continuous work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I will move on with the question that Afra did. She says, hello, I'm delighted to meet you online because I've also been following your work for years. You have another fan here. And her question is, how can AI help with digital accessibility in terms of developing, understanding, evaluating, etc.?
Okay, this is a very big question, and we all want to watch the match Spain and Austria today, right?
True.
Yeah, no, I think AI is a fascinating potential to address so many things. Alone, the automatic captioning that we're using, in a lot of right now, that helps a lot. We used to laugh about it only a few years ago, because it was just so inaccurate. Now I just say, wow. I do see some mistakes in what I'm saying, but overall, just the quality of captioning. So how will it look like in a few years if we see the trajectory of how this is going. This is just one piece. There's so many other potentials. One of the biggest issues, Susie, you touched upon this a couple of times, is people with cognitive and learning disabilities. And one of the issues is WCAG, the strength of a technical standard is really interoperability, addressing interoperability. And that's why it fails a lot for people with cognitive and learning disabilities, is because WCAG doesn't, or any guidelines doesn't do really well in addressing design aspects. It addresses better interoperability aspects. What do I mean by that? It's difficult to say how many words should I use, or how many, but it's easy to say make sure that the text that you put can be processed by an AI, for example, so that it can be automatically summarized, or it can be automatically. So these kind of things, and we're seeing now AI is providing potential for assistive technologies for people in cognitive and learning disabilities, reading assistants, things that will, automatic dictionaries, personalized, like all these kind of tools that we haven't have as much, and we're seeing more now. And so it's opening potentials, even to topics that could be quite sensitive. I'm talking about emotional computing, for example. The computer automatically detects that I'm getting an anxiety attack and changes the color of the website, for example. It avoids red or things like that. It starts to get a bit creepy because now the computer is watching you, monitoring you, etc. There's a lot of questions here relating to privacy and so on. But the potentials are there for AI to really address a lot of things. At the same time, I think, I said that earlier, we have to watch out of AI becoming kind of like the silver bullet solution. We can all go home because AI will solve everything. We still need to think about how AI really intersects. And what I was trying to get at earlier is maybe with AI, we can start thinking about these ability things that are very difficult to put in guidelines, but maybe with AI, we can frame things and say, not in a fixed number, but maybe AI can help us detect how difficult a website is to use by keyboard, for example, and so that we can start addressing some of the usability issues. So basically shifting maybe some of the traditional, quote unquote, traditional accessibility things. We already saw in WCAG 2.1 to WCAG 2.2, one success criteria has been obsoleted. Woohoo! It's a success criteria about parsing. And the idea was when you had certain kind of IDs or nested elements that weren't closed, or certain patterns, then screen readers used to just fail on that, or assistive technologies. Now they don't, because they have better processing. So what I'm trying to say is technology moves, and so certain requirements that we had in WCAG that we needed might become irrelevant. Maybe detecting buttons, like labeling buttons, maybe we won't need that in the future, because AI can detect a button, can label it, can maybe even put it better than an author. So maybe we won't need some of these requirements, but there will be other requirements that we will need, like more on the usability, and the way that websites are becoming more and more complex, that is actually more where we need the focus. The bottom line is AI is giving us a lot of opportunity in addressing types of disabilities we haven't been addressed before with assistive technologies. That in turn could impact how guidelines are written, future guidelines, and that in turn impacts WCAG 3 and the timeline, and why it keeps shifting, and why don't wait for WCAG 3, but if you want, come and help,
I think that we are more likely to have a WCAG 2.3 than 3.0 at this point. But all right, so I really loved this idea of taking the guidelines, focusing in interoperability, and now looking for usability and addressing accessibility from a more direct perspective for the product and for the kind of users that we have. and using AI to test or try to test or work better in those things that guidelines have not addressed yet. And I think actually there's a lot of interest in cognitive accessibility. We've seen that in the master, in the last TFMs, the thesis. A lot of people chose cognitive accessibility to work on. And that is one of the things that make cognitive accessibility so difficult to measure, right? Because it's simple. What is simple and what is not? And thinking about AI as a use to try to close a little bit that gap, I think that's super interesting. But also, I've seen this new scenario that I feel like it is crazy, but I know that you are more optimistic than I am with AI. That there's some companies that are pequeñas, little companies, that they are asking designers to use AI to build personas, and then they interview the AI instead of interviewing actual people. What do you think about that?
Again, I'm more positive, as you said.
Yeah.
I think, scaling the amount of content being created, the complexity of content being created, we have to leverage technology. We have to use technology. So to me, it's not about AI, yes or no. It's about how we use AI and how we use it responsibly and correctly to give us the right answers. So I think we want to embrace it, but we want to move it to the right. Definitely moving away from the fake promises. So I will put another buzzword, the overlays. Put these 2 lines of text in your website and you're all done and nobody will sue you. That is an evil way because it's working with the fear of accessibility. That is really the evil way of portraying accessibility. If you don't do this, you'll be sued. And this is how you'll protect yourself from people with disabilities, as if people with disabilities are the evil. So that's the wrong way of approaching technology, or the wrong way of selling it. But using technology in a responsible way, I think, is a good. In the past, we used to talk about tool-supported expert evaluation. So the expert is in control. The expert uses automatic tools because you can't test an entire website. You crawl the website with an automatic tool, and it gives you results, and it tells you what you need to focus on. It's like a doctor, you do the screening, and there's all these results, all these numbers. It doesn't give you a diagnosis, but as an expert, you look at that, you look at the results coming out from the tool, and you say, okay, I'm going to focus on these few pages. I'm going to look at that in more detail because that here looks fishy. From my years of experience, I know this pattern here means the issue is probably in the template. The issue is probably in the table generator or something. This is where I need to look at. So the combination of the expertise that you have over the years and the tooling to help you scale. And I think we're entering now in an era of tool-supported usability testing. So yes, why not have an expert in control that does not replace usability testing with real people, but it's a way to do that first. So we used to say, before you do a usability testing, before you get users in and waste their time and waste your money, do your checks first. Do your accessibility checks first to be sure, and then you get the users to check the usability aspects of accessibility. That's what you can't really cover with tools more. Well, why not do more of that testing with tools? It's more affordable, it's lower fidelity, it's more scalable, it's easier for people to do. But you have to understand the limitations of that. And that's with any technology. You have to understand what benefits it gives you. It gives you scalability. It gives you kind of like a quick check, but it doesn't give you the full picture. So I'm fully supportive of using AI for partial usability testing if you want, or guided, you know, a subclass of usability. It's not really usability testing because you don't have any users.
Yeah, exactly.
But it gives you, it can give you a pretty good picture and can tell you where you need to focus. And if you bring in users, what you really need to focus on, what you really need to test or to look at. I think that's another use of AI that can be really helpful in testing as well, in trying to move us away from just the technical, the mechanical parts of accessibility into the more usability aspects of accessibility.
It could be like this bridge between the technical part and the final part when we meet the user, so we can meet the user closer to a good solution. I like that idea. So I know that we have 2 minutes left, and I don't want to, take more time out of all of you, but I could talk to you all day long, you know that. But well, I think that's something that is super important, and it is also something that Arantxa mentioned on the chat. That is, AI is not a magic wand, and sometimes companies wanted to solve it, use them as an entire solution. And probably now that we've been talking about this, I understand more your perspective, and I'm being more optimistic around AI, because maybe what we are fighting against is the idea of having AI as the solution, or accessibility being something that AI can do by itself. But no, you are seeing AI as a tool that is part of a process that is constantly being guided by an expert and with the users. And I think that are the most important things around it. And also, I have 1,000 of questions, but I will see you in 2 weeks, so I'm not that worried about my questions. But I know that people, you know, Shadi is, I always say that the most important accessibility professionals that I know are so humble and so generous with their knowledge. So don't be afraid to reach to Shadi and ask any questions anytime you want, because he's so generous, and he has always been like that with me. So thank you very much. And well, there's more questions, but there's no time, so sorry. So thank you, Shadi. I think we are taking a lot of interesting things out of this chat in this hour and 15 minutes that we already had. And well, that is something that you can take now home. That is the idea of AI being, you know, not being magic, and standards not being rigid checklists, but everything being something that we can use together with measure. And well, we will see amazing things in the next future. I think the close future with AI. And well, we will be always here opening discussions. And of course that is something that I always tell my students also, is that you have to participate. You don't need to be the biggest expert in the world. You have a perspective that is unique, and we need more people and more perspectives to build this great profession that is accessibility in these places where we don't have a lot of diversity so far. We need more people from Latin America, from Spain, women, different genders. You know, we need more perspectives in W3C. So just come join. Join the discussions. You have a GitHub. You can enter there your questions, your comments. You have the community groups. There's a lot of ways of participating, and you will find amazing people such as Shadi. And okay, thank you again, Shadi, for your time.
Thank you, Susan, everybody, for your kind words. And yes, it takes a village, and all of us together. Welcome to the world of accessibility. Looking forward to engage with you. And I am on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out. All the best, everyone.
Okay, ciao. Let's see the match. Let's go see the match, Shadi.
Like, ciao, ciao.
Muchas gracias. Un abrazo a todos.
Ciao.
Thank you very much. Well,
Gracias.